I think we need to stop drawing these imaginary red lines in our head and thinking that if we give that bit of equipment, is that an escalation in the mind of the Kremlin or whatever? We need to give Ukraine what it needs, supplement that with proper training, proper logistics, and ensure they can use that capability to ultimately win the war.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is going to use the trip to announce extra British military support, including plans to train Ukrainian pilots, paving the way for them to eventually being able to fly sophisticated NATO standard jets, which have been a key request from President Zelenskyy. Well, last year, a group of MPs travelled to Kyiv to meet with Zelenskyy, and one of them was the SNP MP Stuart MacDonald. I caught up with him just before we came on air and asked him how significant it was that Britain and the House of Parliament is hosting the Ukrainian president today.
Well, I think it is significant. He's obviously not left his country, bar from one visit to the United States fairly recently, since the outbreak of the February invasion last year. And he has, not only has he not left his country, he's been addressing his people every single night and giving leadership from the top. So I think the fact that he's leaving to come here, I understand he's also going to be visiting the continent as well, in a display, I think, of thanks to those who continue to support him and continue to support his country and support his people, is of significance. And I'm sure he will be given the warmest welcome by everyone who meets him whilst he's here.
And you met him when you travelled with other MPs to Kyiv in September last year. What's he like? I mean, lots of, he hasn't been seen in the flesh, if you like, by most people in Britain. What's he like in person, carrying this extraordinary responsibility?
Well, he's a remarkably friendly person. That when I met him in September, when I was in Ukraine, he didn't spend a long time with us, because we were there, if you cast your mind back, just as Kharkiv region was starting to be liberated by Ukraine's armed forces. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think it was on the day that news was breaking. We met him a couple of hours after that news was public. So he didn't spend a long time with us, but he was remarkably friendly. He has kind of no airs and graces about him. We just talked about the support that his country has been getting, the support that his country was needing and still needs, and sort of straight down to that level of discussion with him and some of his top officials. There was no kind of, he just walked into the room. There was no kind of, announcement that he was arriving, and although we were expecting to see him, but it was remarkably informal in that sense, if you know what I mean.
And in terms of the increased support that Britain is offering today, Rishi Sunak is announcing that military training will be extended to pilots, Ukrainian pilots and Marines. There's also the offer of accelerating military equipment and I think long-range capabilities as well.
Yeah.
Is that a good move? Is it enough, do you think? I mean, it does feel as if we're sort of constantly ratcheting it up. And I suppose sometimes you might wonder, well, if we'd done all of this 6 months ago, would that have had a bigger impact?
That's a good question. Yes, I think it is a good move, and even where some of this stuff is late, better late than never. I've always supported, right from the start, in fact, back to before the February invasion, when people like myself and others like Tobias Ellwood, an odd coalition you might think, were raising the alarm on this. I've always supported the maximum military support for the country. Now, it's on the one hand, it's very easy to say give Ukraine all the weaponry and platforms that it needs, but you do need to supplement that properly to ensure that members of Ukraine's armed forces are properly trained in the use of that equipment, and that they have the proper logistics and maintenance capability for whatever equipment you give them as well. So as long as you can have that full wraparound package, as long as you do that in concert with other countries, the US, other countries in Europe, then yes, I've always supported the maximum military support. And I get really frustrated with this kind of false debate that we've just gone round on the Leopard 2 tanks that have been finally supplied and given the go-ahead by Germany. It looks like we're about to have a similar frustration with F-16 jets. I think we need to stop drawing these imaginary red lines in our head and thinking that if we give that bit of equipment, is that an escalation in the mind of the Kremlin or whatever. We need to give Ukraine what it needs, supplement that with proper training, proper logistics, and ensure they can use that capability to ultimately win the war.
And your position on this, your decision to travel to Ukraine and be outspoken in support of Ukraine, has not been without consequence. And you think that your emails have been hacked by a Russian group?
So I've gone public this morning on a criminal hack that took place against my personal account and the personal account of one of my staff. I've worked with officials in Parliament's security team and officials at the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ, on this. We have looked at and discussed a lot of what has actually taken place here and discussed who that might be. And there are two motivations, Matt, for going public on this. One is really to raise awareness that this does happen. These spear phishing attempts aren't like the normal kind of junk emails that I'm sure you and many of your listeners will receive on a daily basis that are obviously scam emails. These are targeted and sophisticated, and I've spoken to several other people who unfortunately have also fallen victim to this. And these are people who, a bit like me, I've always been a bit more aware on issues like cybersecurity. So part of the reason is to raise awareness of this, but I also just don't know what will happen. I don't know if some of that stolen content will make it online. If it does, I fully expect it will be online alongside manipulated and falsified information, as is a normal and not new technique of these types of groups. So, but I think the main thing I want to get across to your listeners is really take the time to read and practice the guidance from NCSC. It's not complicated. It can sometimes feel a bit cumbersome and take a bit of time, but when it comes to this sort of stuff, time is your friend. And those who want to steal our personal data, whether you're a member of Parliament, an academic, or just a member of the public, those who want to steal our personal data are growing in sophistication and growing in their aggression as well. So it's really important to take the time to understand best practice and implement best practice as much as possible.
That was the SNP MP, Stuart McDonald, speaking to me just a few minutes ago before we came on air. Speaking ahead of the visit by Volodymyr Zelenskyy, he has now, we think, just touched down in an RAF plane at Stansted on his way to Westminster. And you can hear President Zelenskyy's speech in full to MPs and peers in Westminster Hall. We'll be able to catch that live at 1 o'clock on Mariella Frostrup's show here on Times Radio.